As we know, the power of June is imagination, and the power of July is understanding. And I don't typically think about imagination with understanding. I usually put it with faith, you know? If I imagine something, I have faith that I can do it. I have faith that it will happen. But the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that imagination, it's through the power of understanding that I can bring something into fruition. So with that idea of imagination, I would like to share with you how I see it, how I define it. I see it as being, oh good, it worked. Imagination, the ability to visualize and see the possibilities or potential. And I just stopped right there because I wanted to say that means that I can see the possibilities or potential within myself, within my family, my group, my community, a situation. And, you know, I think Deepak Chopra said it really well. Worrying is the biggest waste of imagination, and creativity is the greatest use. So we do have the power to decide whether or not we want to use imagination to drive ourselves into misery, or we have the choice to use it for our positive good. When I think about imagination, I first go to my son. He's 4. And then I think about myself as a child and all of you, and I see what the past probably looked like, must have. But when I go back to my own life, I think about the Lake Afton Public Observatory. Anybody been there? Okay, so you guys know where we're talking about. When I was a kid, I went to Lake Afton Public Observatory all the time. I don't mean like once a month, I mean every weekend. I think my mom must have been taking an astronomy class at WSU because we had a key. And I still don't know quite how that happened, but I thought it was really cool. And I told all my friends at school that I had an observatory because I could go anytime I wanted. But what we would do is we would go to the observatory. She'd get me up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm groggy. I'm sure my sister was there, but I'm not sure because I don't really remember her being there because I was so in my own imagination. So what we would do is we would go and lock the door. It was usually cold because that's when the best stargazing was. So it was usually cold, and we would go into the observatory room, which if you haven't been there, it's a big black room, and there's a platform in the center. So you have to go up these steps, and when you're small, those steps were huge. And that's where the telescope was housed. And there was a computer just over here that controlled the telescope. There was a ladder that was that we could move up to the dome. My job, when we first started going out there, was to open the dome. I thought it was really, really cool. Of course I was, because I got to open the ceiling of something. I mean, come on, right? But then my job grew as I became more and more aware of what was happening. As I learned alongside my mother, I was able to start putting in the coordinates that we would be placing the telescope to. Now you know, Bruce Moxley knows for sure. He knows that I was sitting there as a kid and I was working for Starfleet. So this is who I was. You know, I kind of moved in between Kirk and Spock, and you know, I didn't really want to be the ladies because they didn't have a whole lot of power, you know. I wanted to go into warp speed. And I really wanted to say, beam me up, Scotty. Now, That's my imagination. And as my understanding grew bigger, grew stronger, my imaginative world grew. It really gained power because I had a better understanding of the planetary world, right? I had a better understanding of what a double star meant. I had a clearer understanding of how to access it through this incredible machine in this really cool building that somehow I own. But somebody else was imagining at the same time, because then we came to this. Who remembers when the Motorola Razr came out that was just like Captain Kirk's communicator? Some people are like, yep, if you pay attention to whose heads are nodding, you know who the Trekkies are. Just saying. So somebody else had a great deal of understanding of how to move a photograph from my pocket to your phone or to your email. Somebody had that understanding. I don't know how. Somebody else had understanding to take this idea of bridging two land masses. Who recognizes that? Yeah, it's San Francisco. So I have no idea. I really, truly can tell you, I have no idea how I would look from this shore to that one and say, I want to cross this tumultuous sea. And I'm going to make it happen. But somebody saw it, somebody visualized, they saw that potential, and it became this. And it's been there for so long, and we use it. Well, I don't. I've never been there. But people use it every day, and they probably take it for granted. Now, this takes real imagination. So this is the Brooklyn Bridge, and when I was looking for bridges and pictures of bridges, I found this, and I thought, no. So somebody that's really creative had to look again at that space and say, yeah, 25. That's a good number. People aren't going to die if there's only 25 people that walk across this very loose bridge to build a massive one. But it also takes imagination and understanding plus faith for those workers to see that the engineers created something that makes this possible, right? So we turn to Scripture, talking about those dreams of seeing something that's there. So in Genesis 37, it's when in Genesis around this area is when we're talking about Joseph, who's the son of Jacob and Rachel, right? He's the youngest son. He's considered the miracle. He's the gift. And his older brothers, they don't really appreciate him all that much because he has their father's favor. But he has these dreams. And he's a wonderful representation of imagination in this book that teaches us if we look beyond. So his father gave him the colorful coat. We all have heard that story, right? So if we look at that coat, we know that at that time, somebody in his status would have been given a drab-colored coat, right? The colorful coats were for those of royalty or those of wealth. And his brothers knew it, and they didn't have colorful coats. So when he comes to them with a dream and he says, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Can you imagine being that older brother that says, really? So what did they do? Well, we're going to fix this and we're going to sell him. So he goes and he's sold into slavery. They've washed their hands of him. They're done. So this dream, along with others that he had that showed, that expressed that he was going to be bowed to by his brothers, it was just the tip of the iceberg. Because he was a dreamer and a dream interpreter, Pharaoh heard about him, right? So because of his dreaming and his dream interpretation, Pharaoh grew to trust him and actually made him second in command. So when the Israelites are coming from Canaan over to Egypt, all of a sudden, his brothers are having to bow down to him. So I want to return for a moment to the coat. If Joseph is represented, if Joseph is represented as imagination, and he's given this coat, then the coat would be our mind, our cloth, the things that we tampen out our imagination. When we start thinking about the brothers who were jealous and angry, the brothers who felt slighted, and they would have been receiving a dampened color, a dull color. And we have Joseph, who received this vibrant color. We see that if he were to have placed the cloak over himself of drab dullness, that becomes the tamping out of our imagination, of our ability to see the potential. But as soon as we switch coats and we begin to clothe ourselves in vivid color, we can even begin to see the potential that we never thought possible. That coat, that cloaking of awareness, that nourishing of the imagination allows us to create the world. Edgar Cayce says, every moment of our lives, we are creating the images and patterns that give our future energy and shape. My mom always summed that up as, Edgar Cayce said, thought is form. Be careful what you're thinking. That still is with me today when I start thinking about the potential of sadness, of hurt, of pain in the world. I think to myself, Edgar Cayce said, thought is form. If I think it, it becomes. And there is that imagination. Returning to the stars, Carl Sagan says, imagination will often carry us to worlds that never were, but without it, we go nowhere. The more that we learn about quantum physics, I often wonder, Carl Sagan, the physicist, I often wonder, if I'm thinking it here, is there an aspect of me doing it there? And when I start thinking about quantum physics in that way and learn what little I can, because it's really hard to understand for me, it helps me to shift my awareness of my imagination and allow it to truly see and create and enliven and illuminate the world that I know can be, that I know on some plane is, and that is a world that truly works for everyone. And I know that we in this community are imagining that very thing for Unity of Wichita. Imagining it for our community and for ourselves. And with that, I say thank you so much. And come back next week as we focus a little more on the understanding piece and bridge these two powers that truly allow us to create the life we desire. Thank you.